I have to tell you something right away. When people hear the word revenge, many of them think of movies or television shows where someone plans with dramatic music in the background. Real revenge does not look like that. Real revenge sneaks up on you in the middle of heartbreak, humiliation, or plain anger. It is messy, it is risky, and it always teaches you something about who you really are. This story does exactly that. People hear it and they lean in and say, "No way that actually happened." It did happen. The story began with me years ago, when I was head over heels in love. I am talking about the kind of love where you would walk through fire if that was what it took. I thought I had found my forever person. I thought I had found the person to grow old with on the porch and drink sweet tea with. Life does not play fair, and sometimes the person you would catch a grenade for is the one pulling the pin. I began to notice little things. You know how it goes. The late-night work calls that did not make sense. The sudden change in perfume, or in his case, the way he smelled. The way the phone never left his side, even in private places. At first, I told myself stories to make the cracks look like shadows. He is just tired, I told myself. He is stressed at work. I tell myself I am overthinking. But deep down, my instinct was making noise. It was louder than a fire alarm. One night, proof landed in my lap like a brick through a window. A message. A photograph. A voice message that was not meant for me but somehow arrived on my phone. Nothing feels like that first drop of betrayal. Your ears ring. Your chest feels hollow. Yet, in that shock, there is a tiny, icy spark in your brain. It whispers, "Okay, pay attention." I did not explode right away. The best kind of revenge is not loud. The best kind is patient. It is calculated. It is surgical. They believed they were the clever one. They believed I was going to sit there, smile, and play the fool. Not today. I began to gather little pieces, quietly, casually. Screenshots here, receipts there, dates, times, and places. All of this was done without one crack in my poker face. People would have thought I was still in love the way I kept my cool. That is the secret. Do not show your cards until you are ready to slam them down. While I collected the pieces, my mind spun with decisions. Do I go all the way? Do I simply walk away? Do I confront them in public? Or do I make them feel what it is like to choke on the taste of their own medicine? The plan that unfolded was somewhere between poetic justice and pure chaos. The way it all exploded is still a tale people tell when they see me. Before I give away the exact way I flipped the script, let me ask you this. Have you ever caught somebody red-handed and thought, I could end this right now, or I could let them hang themselves with their own rope? That decision is where the real revenge begins. Mine was only just starting. I will tell you what happened next. After that first brick of proof landed in my lap, life did not slow down. It did not make space for a melodramatic confrontation. Instead, it carried on with all its little errands and routines, as if nothing important had changed. I learned quickly that this was the perfect camouflage for what I was about to do. People do not notice the hawk when it perches on a fence post. They only notice the flurry when it swoops. For days, I moved through the world like a woman in a costume. I still made the tea in the morning. I still folded laundry and put the milk away in the same spot. I smiled at neighbors. I answered the same polite questions. Nobody would have guessed anything was amiss. That was the point. I did not want anyone to give the target a single hint that I was anything but calm. Revenge is a strange craft. It requires patience and a steady hand. I began with small things that felt safe to collect. I saved messages and photographs, and I made careful note of times and places. I wrote down details that most people would think trivial, and yet those details sometimes tell the whole story. A pattern emerged from the small pieces, and patterns are merciless. They show you betrayal not as a single ugly moment, but as a continuous thread woven through many days. I spent a lot of time watching without being seen. I learned the rhythms of their routine better than they did. When the person left for work in the morning, I watched the car back out of the driveway. When they returned late, I noticed exactly how the door closed. I do not recommend this as a hobby. It is a strange way to live, but it was part of the plan. The more I knew, the more precise the plan could become. As I watched, opportunities presented themselves like doors opening. Some were too small to matter on their own, but they fit together like puzzle pieces. There was a dinner party where the person I was focused on loved to showboat. They liked attention. They liked proof that others admired them. That personality trait became a tool in my hands. When somebody wants the spotlight, you give them a stage and you let them perform. Then you control the lights. Meanwhile, I spoke to people who did not know the full story. I asked casual questions. I listened. I let others reveal their own perceptions of the target. People love to talk when they do not suspect they are part of a plan. I learned about wild rumors that had nothing to do with me. I heard about small cruelties that this person had offered others. Those things were not excuses for revenge. They were additional facts. They made the picture clearer. There was one moment that mattered more than the rest. It was not dramatic when it happened. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was standing by the window, making notes in a shoebox notebook. The kind of small lined book I always keep for shopping lists and thoughts. The phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend, casual at first, and then a photograph attached. The photograph showed the target smiling with someone new, a person who had no idea of the damage done. The photograph was banal. That is the worst kind of proof, ordinary and precise. It told me two things. 1, the betrayal was not over. 2, if I wanted to end this chapter of my life with dignity and wit, I would have to act, and I would have to be clever. I will be honest. There was a moment of temptation to act hot-headed. I pictured dramatic scenes. I imagined calling the target and reading all the evidence aloud. I pictured confrontations in front of friends and family, sharp words and slammed doors. Those images feel satisfying in the moment, but they are small victories that leave you empty. I wanted something that would matter. I wanted something that would reveal the truth to the world in such a way that the person who had betrayed me could no longer hide behind charm or lies. So I began to stitch together a plan that had 3 parts. First, documentation. I would make sure I had irrefutable proof. Second, exposure. I would set conditions where the betrayal could not be shrugged away or explained with a clever lie. Third, consequence. I decided that the reveal must carry a consequence appropriate to the betrayal. I am not a vengeful person for the sake of cruelty. I wanted justice served in a way that would teach a lesson and protect others from future harm. I reached out to one person I trusted completely, who agreed to help without question. This friend had a calm manner and a firm sense of discretion. I needed someone who would keep secrets and also execute the plan with a steady nerve. We spoke in coded language on the phone. We met in a cafe during a thunderstorm to finalize details. There is something about rain and plotting that feels cinematic, but the rain did not make the plan romantic. It made the nearby chatter thinner and our movements less noticed. We chose the place of exposure carefully. It had to be public enough that the person could not slither away, but private enough that the people present would matter. It had to be an event where the target would crave attention, because the plan relied on that craving. For the man I was dealing with, it was a gala for a local charity where he loved to be seen. He would be dressed in his best, working the room with a practiced smile. He would bask in the admiration of neighbors and colleagues. That made it the perfect stage. Meanwhile, I did the tedious work of backups. I printed copies of messages, photographs, and notes, and I stored them in envelopes with dates on them. I made digital copies on thumb drives. I labeled everything twice. I am a woman who has had enough experience with loss to know the cruelty of losing evidence through some small, avoidable mistake. Organization in a plan like this is not glamorous. It is necessary. As the date approached, my heart would not stay still. I had moments of doubt. I worried about consequences I had not foreseen. Would this blow up my life as well? Would people judge me for taking matters into my own hands? These were valid concerns. I held them close and then set them down like stones. Sometimes you must carry a burden for a moment and then place it aside to move forward. At last, the night arrived. I was ready in ways that had nothing to do with appearance. I was ready because I had assembled the truth, and I had a clear plan for revealing it. I had practiced what I would say in my head, until the words tasted familiar. Still, there was a small human tremor in my hands as I put the envelope in my bag. That tremor told me I was not some storybook avenger. I was a woman who had been hurt and who wanted to take back her dignity. I walked into the gala with my friend at my side. The room smelled of perfume and polished shoes and candle wax. People drifted in with laughter and clipped conversation. There he was, exactly as predicted, smiling, charming, and unaware that the night belonged to someone else. I will not tell you the next part yet. I will save that, because it is the part where the table flips and the lesson becomes clear. For now, you need to understand how I prepared and how I chose the moment. The rest is coming, and trust me, you will want to hear how it all unfolded. I will tell you what changed everything. After I had gathered proof and chosen the place, there was a moment where patience turned into a steady, heating pressure. That is what I call the boiling point. It is the moment when anger and purpose combine, and you can no longer drift along pretending nothing happened. It is the point where you decide whether you will simmer and sigh or whether you will act. In the days before the gala, I felt that pressure like a kettle on the stove. It was not a sudden eruption. It was a slow, constant hum in my chest. Every time I saw his smiling face in the neighborhood, or when a neighbor mentioned how charming he looked that week, the hum grew louder. People enjoyed topping up their stories with compliments because it feeds the image. They did not know how carefully I had been keeping score. On Thursday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my shoebox notebook open. There were columns and dates and a list of small things that together read like a ledger of betrayal. I wrote down one more thing and then put the pen down. The list made the choice seem less personal and more factual. It was no longer only my grief and my fury. It was an organized record of another human being choosing deception again and again. That helped me breathe. That week, I found myself rehearsing in small moments. I practiced the tone I would use. I told myself to speak plainly. No flourishes, no melodrama. I wanted the reveal to be unmistakable and clear. People respond to clarity. Lies feed on confusion. So I practiced simple sentences in my head, like I was learning lines for a play. I did not want anyone to be able to twist my words. The boiling point also forced me to face questions I had been avoiding. Is public exposure necessary? Will it humiliate more than it reveals? Who else will be hurt by this? I thought about his family and my friends. I thought about the ripple effect. Every action has waves. I do not deny that. I considered all of it. In the end, I decided that some truths must be seen openly for them to have weight. Secrets hide in shadows. Exposure brings consequence. I also thought about timing. Revenge is not revenge if it is rushed. If you fling accusations in the first heat of heartbreak, they will be dismissed as drama. I wanted my action to land when the target was comfortable, confident, and convinced that nothing could touch him. That way the shock would be doubled. Comfort makes people careless, and carelessness reveals the real self. The morning of the gala, I woke early. I did not feel dramatic. I felt precise. I made tea and I ate a small piece of toast. I checked my bag to make sure the envelopes were secure. I told myself small, steady things. Breathe, be calm, speak the truth. There was a strange clarity to the day. Pain and purpose had made room for focus. At noon, I received a message from a mutual friend. They asked if I was attending. They said, casually, that this person would be there, and that they were excited to see the guests mingle. The message had a clipped, happy tone. I could tell by the punctuation that nobody suspected anything. I answered with a simple yes and a row of polite emojis. I could have been writing about the weather. That is how well I had covered my tracks. As the hour approached, I found my thoughts drifting not to revenge itself, but to consequence. I thought about what I wanted to happen after the reveal. I did not want merely to lash out. I wanted truth to be acknowledged. I wanted responsibility. I wanted a space where the facts could not be smeared by charm. That shaped the final lines I planned to speak. They were short, precise, and factual. No insults, no extravagant melodrama. The goal was clarity and accountability. One of the hardest parts of the boiling was the temptation to tell the whole world prematurely. At one point, I almost sent an anonymous message to a group of acquaintances with a hint of scandal. Then I reminded myself that vagueness can be dismissed. People say, "Ooh, drama," and then a week later they forget. The sting of exposure must be undeniable. That is why I chose a place where people he cared about would see the evidence before he could offer a spinning excuse. I also wrestled with fear. What if I was wrong? What if I had misunderstood some messages? Evidence had to be airtight. I reviewed everything again and again. I made sure that each piece fit into a pattern and that the pattern made sense. That is the difference between accusation and proof. The second one can be laid out in neat rows for anyone to read. Another part of the boiling point was the emotional toll. People imagine plotting revenge makes you feel powerful. Sometimes it does. But power is heavy. It demands a cost. There were nights when I sat in my living room and felt hollow. I wondered if becoming an avenger would change me in ways I would not like. I thought about walking away and finding peace elsewhere. The voice that suggested walking away was practical and kind, but the other voice, the one that wanted the truth to be known, was louder. By late afternoon, my friend confirmed a small but crucial detail. The person would be on stage for a brief presentation. That made the plan concrete. He loved those short moments in the spotlight. He would be comfortable there. He would be flattered. That was the dangerous combination. You do not confront vanity in private and expect the same ripples. Vanity multiplies when observed. I will say this plainly. The boiling point is lonely. Even when you have an ally, the final heat is yours alone to carry. I practiced my lines quietly in the car. I rehearsed the sequence of handing out envelopes and the order in which I would speak. It sounds absurd to plan speech like one plans a small ceremony, but ceremonies give structure to a moment that otherwise risks turning into chaos. I needed structure, or the night would be nothing but emotion without meaning. By the time I stepped into the gala, the kettle had reached a hum I could not ignore. My palms were steady because they had been trained to be steady. My friend and I moved through the room like people who belonged there. I smiled and I engaged in small talk. I sat near enough to the stage to see the expressions on faces. I watched him laugh, and I watched him grin with that practiced charm. People who betray with ease often grow used to the applause. There is an odd calm that comes right before doing something consequential. It is not the absence of nerves. It is the presence of resolve. The boiling had done its work. It had clarified the rightness of action. It had turned raw pain into a plan that was precise and fair. I did not feel vindictive. I felt it was necessary. And then the moment came for which many people wait their whole lives. The moment when you step up and tell the truth to a room that will not let it be hidden. I am not telling you what I did at that moment yet. I am telling you instead how the heat of days and nights of watching and preparing had made the action certain. The boiling point is the precursor to the reveal. It is the part where you decide whether you will be a storm or simply a rain that is easily brushed away. I had chosen to be the storm. I will explain the plan I built. After the boiling point, everything had to move from anger into strategy. Revenge of any note is not improvised theater. It is careful work. It is like building a house. First you lay a foundation, then you raise the walls, and finally you place the roof. If any part is weak, the whole thing collapses and you are left with rubble. I wanted a structure that would stand. The first thing I did was divide the plan into clear pieces. I wanted evidence, timing, witnesses, and an exit. Evidence meant documents and numbers and photographs that could not be shrugged off as hearsay. Timing meant choosing a moment when the person would be least able to wiggle free with charm or a lie. Witnesses meant people whose observations mattered, who could corroborate what I would say. The exit meant how I would leave the room afterward with my dignity intact, whether the night finished in heated words or in stunned silence. Once those pieces were clear in my head, the real work began. I prepared the evidence carefully. I printed copies and put them into envelopes. I also made digital copies and stored them in multiple places. Do not make the mistake of thinking a single photograph on a phone will be enough. Phones fail, files become corrupted. A piece of paper with a date and a signature, held in your hand, has a gravity that pixels lack. I dated everything clearly, and I wrote a short note on each envelope to explain what the item contained. That way, if anyone later tried to claim I was making things up, the document presentation would speak for itself. Next, I rehearsed what I would say. I did not want to sound like someone delivering a speech at a divorce trial. I wanted to sound calm, precise, and undeniable. My lines were direct sentences. I avoided melodrama. For example, I planned to say, "On these dates, the following messages occurred," and then to hand the envelopes to a trusted person who would place them on a table in full view. It sounds simple. That is the point. Simple sentences are hard to twist. I also planned small visual cues. People respond strongly to visual order. If you walk into a room and see a neat row of envelopes with dates on them, the mind does not hear some dramatic accusation. The mind reads procedure. That is powerful. It makes the truth feel inevitable. You are not screaming, you are showing. I liked that posture. It felt clean. Timing mattered more than anything. I had spent weeks watching and learning the rhythms of the person I was targeting. I knew what events he liked, where he sought attention, and when he felt most at ease. I chose a local gala because he loved the stage. He loved being seen. When someone basks in the light, they are less careful. Vanity loosens the tongue and the memory. It also makes people careless about the small gaps in their stories. That was the opening I needed. I created opportunities for corroboration. I quietly spoke to a few people I trusted who would be at the gala. I did not tell them everything. I did not want to spoil the surprise. I merely asked if they would be willing to listen if a serious accusation were presented, and if they would be prepared to support clear, factual statements. A handful of friends agreed. That is a rarer commodity than you would think, allies who will stand in a moment when reputations are at stake. I relied on those allies to give context to the facts I would reveal. There was also a practical detail I considered carefully: how to ensure the person would not simply flee or call a lawyer and bury the moment in legal fog. For that reason, I planned the reveal in a way that would make immediate escape difficult. I arranged for the envelopes to be laid out before the person spoke. I orchestrated a small pause between his presentation and the time I would stand. Pauses, when used well, are currency. They build expectation and remove the ability for the person to script the moment. That is when the truth is hardest to disguise. My friend and I also decided on the order of exposure. I planned to begin with the least sensational pieces of evidence and then move to the most damning. That way, the room would have time to process each fact. If you drop the biggest bomb first, people sometimes freeze and do not follow the logic. If you build the case slowly, by the time you place the final piece on the table, everyone present understands how the pattern is formed. Patterns are compelling because they show intention. I thought about the words I would use and about the tone I would hold. I chose to be factual and unemotional. Emotions can be weaponized against you. They allow others to say you are overreacting. I did not want any of that. I wanted the facts to sit like stones on a table. People could either move them, or they could read them. They could not call them feelings and dismiss them. Evidence of action is not opinion. There was also a legal edge to my thinking. I did not want to be reckless. I sought counsel informally from a friend of a friend who understood what constitutes defamation and what constitutes provable wrongdoing. I was careful to align the plan so that it exposed factual occurrences rather than allegations without basis. This is not the place for rumors. The only power that survives scrutiny is the one that can be shown in black and white. While all of this may sound very cold and calculated, there was a human element I kept returning to. I did not want to humiliate without purpose. I wanted the reveal to be a boundary-setting act. It was about protecting myself and others. It was about showing that words matter and promises matter and that deception has consequences. I told myself, again and again, that this was not cruelty, but necessary clarity. As the night approached, I prepared my own emotional exit. I did not want to be dragged into a shouting match. I rehearsed how to hand the envelopes, how to speak the facts, and then how to leave the space gracefully. That exit was crucial. If you stay to fight after the reveal, the story becomes about who yelled the loudest. If you leave with dignity, the story remains about what was revealed. Leaving is the punctuation mark. I practiced the step of walking out until it felt natural. Finally, I prepared for what might happen afterward. There would be gossip. There would be chatter. There might be consequences I had not predicted. I accepted that as part of the price. I also prepared a short statement to give later to any friend or neighbor who asked for my version. It was simple. I would state the facts and say that I had acted to protect myself and those around me. I did not crave pity. I wanted clarity. That is the plan in all its parts: evidence, timing, witnesses, and exit. Precise words, neat envelopes, and a calm demeanor. It was not romantic. It was not cinematic in the way television depicts, but it was, I think, effective. And I will tell you this: the work of planning was its own kind of therapy. In arranging the details, I took power back. I am not saying any of that made me feel victorious. I am saying that it made me feel like I was standing on the firm ground of my own life again. Now, I am not going to reveal the execution here. I will save that for the next part. The plan had been set, every piece in place, and the night was waiting. What I will say is this: when strategy meets timing, the result is rarely forgettable. What happened next changed a number of lives, and it will change the way you think about truth being shown in public. Stay with me and I will tell you exactly how it all unfolded. The night arrived, and everything was as planned. I walked into the room with a calm that surprised even me. I had dressed simply, not to draw attention, because attention on me would have distracted from what I intended to show. My friend was at my side, steady and composed. We moved to a table close enough to the stage to see faces clearly and far enough away that no one would mistake us for troublemakers. The room hummed with polite conversation, clinking glasses, and the low laughter of people comfortable in their circles. He walked on stage, all charm and practiced ease, and the audience leaned forward to applaud. He gave his little speech, the one he loved because it let him shine. He smiled at the right moments and laughed in the right places. I listened like a person at the opera watches a singer hit a high note, appreciating form while the content phrase beneath it. Then his smile widened, and that was my cue. I rose slowly and walked toward the table where I had placed the envelopes, each with a neat handwritten date on the front. People noticed the movement and the murmur grew quiet. He was still talking when I reached the table. He did not yet know what was coming. I will tell you exactly what I did, because precision matters in these things. I placed the first envelope on the table and opened my mouth. My voice was steady. I had practiced the opening line until it felt like a simple factual statement. I said, On these dates, the following messages were exchanged. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse with melodrama. I handed the first envelope to a friend I had asked beforehand to hold it on the table for everyone to see. The friend did so without hesitation, and the sight of an envelope with a date resting on the polished wood made people lean in. Then I unfurled the sequence. I read the first few lines aloud, slow and clear, so there would be no mishearing. The room shifted. Some faces softened in sympathy. Others furrowed as they tried to make sense. He realized something serious was going on, but he kept his smile because that was his habit. People that live by charm learn quickly to smile in discomfort. I watched the actor on his stage begin to feel the lights differently. I continued with the little pieces. I did not shout. I did not call names with the passion of a courtroom drama. I laid one fact after another in plain language. A photograph here, a receipt there, times matched with messages. Each piece alone might have been dismissed. Together, they formed a track that showed movement and intention. I watched that track tighten around him like a well-made noose, not because I wished harm, but because truth needed to be visible. At first, he tried to laugh it off. He made a joke about being popular, and a few in the audience gave him a nervous chuckle. But his ease was slipping like a sweater sliding off wet shoulders. He attempted to pivot with charm, to offer explanations that were thin as tissue paper. I let him try. People forgive reasonable explanations. They do not forgive a chain of small facts that fit together too neatly. The crucial moment came when I handed the envelope that contained the voice message. I had saved it for last because a voice carries reality in a way that text cannot. The recording played through a small device I had placed on the table. It was him, candid, speaking intimately to a woman who was not me, saying things that left no room for plausible deniability. The sound filled the room in a way pictures could not. Heads turned. There was a sharp intake of breath like the sound the ocean makes when it withdraws from a beach. He stood there, mouth half open, watching the demonstration of his own words. People who saw his face at that moment say they remember him losing color. He reached for the microphone, which is what some people do when they want to take control of a narrative. He tried to respond. I expected a defense, perhaps an explanation intended to salvage him in the minds of acquaintances. What came out instead was a scattering of excuses, a few names of places he had been, a claim that these things had been taken out of context. That was when the room changed from curiosity to judgment. One of the allies I had asked to be ready stood and spoke. She simply said, "We have all seen these envelopes. We have been given the facts." Her voice was concise. That phrase, plain and steady, forced the logic of the evening into view. It became harder and harder for anyone to protect him with a shrug or a laugh. Then people began to speak up. A neighbor told of a time he had seen similar behavior. A colleague recalled a troubling pattern in business dealings. When multiple voices line up behind facts, charm becomes a poor shield. He tried to turn to those he thought would defend him. Some offered thin smiles of discomfort. Others moved their chairs away. People who had once applauded him now exchanged looks that said the applause had been misplaced. He grew agitated. He started to plead. His pleading was not dramatic. It was thin and small, and it revealed in its thinness that he had not expected a moment like this. He asked for mercy and forgiveness. He said he had made mistakes. That is the part people remember most. The way a person who thought themselves invincible shrunk when confronted with evidence. I will not pretend that I felt vindictive pleasure in watching him stumble. The truth is more complex. There was satisfaction in the unfolding of truth, but it was not the hollow kind. It felt heavy and righteous. It felt like setting right a crooked picture on the wall. There was also pity. People are complicated. We wound, and we are wounded. The reveal did not make me feel triumphant in a way that would feed cruelty. It made me feel steady. The echo of that evening spread. Conversations followed me home. I received messages the next day from people who said they had suspected but did not know how to say it. They thanked me for making facts visible. They said that I had given them a way to understand what they had also felt, but could not prove. That is one of the strange things about exposure. It does not only expose one person, it gives language to many. He tried, in the days after, to repair his reputation with frantic calls and with public statements. He apologized in a letter that read like a list of excuses. He sought forgiveness in the polite pages of social events. Some people forgave him because people are capable of forgiveness. Others did not. What the evening did, however, was change the terms of what it meant to be seen as respectable in that circle. The veneer had been scraped, and the underlying pattern showed through. In the end, the execution of the plan was not an act of melodrama. It was an act of demonstration. I showed the evidence, I allowed witnesses to speak, and I left the room with my head held at a steady angle. I left so the night could breathe without being about the noise I might make. When I walked out, I felt both the cost and the clarity of what had happened. I knew the world would rearrange itself around a new truth, and that some people would be relieved and some would be shocked. That is the nature of serious exposure. It is not always pretty. It is rarely simple. It is often the only way to move from private pain to public understanding. What happened in that room changed many things: relationships, reputations, and even how people treated each other thereafter. I will tell you more about the aftermath, the consequences, and the small ways life reknit itself in the days to come. For now, know that the execution landed. It did what it was meant to do. The rest of the story is not finished, and that is where the next part begins. When the night was over, I walked out of that hall with a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. There was no cheering, no high-five moment, no dramatic soundtrack playing in the background. Just silence. A heavy silence that felt like the air itself was readjusting. My phone buzzed all night and into the next morning. Some messages were short. "You were brave," or "Finally, the truth is out." Others were longer, people sharing their own stories, their own moments of betrayal, their own times when they wished they had done what I did. But not everyone was supportive. Let us be honest, truth is messy, and when it cuts through a community, it does not leave everyone smiling. Some thought I went too far. Some whispered that I could have kept it private, handled it quietly. I knew those voices would come. They always do, because facing the truth is uncomfortable, and people like comfort even when it is built on lies. Still, when I laid my head down at night, I felt something I had not felt in years. Peace. Not joy, not revenge high, just peace. As for him, the fallout was quick. Calls stopped coming, invitations dried up. His name carried weight before that night, but afterward, people spoke it in hushed tones or not at all. That is the thing about reputations. They are like glass. They can look strong, but once cracked, they never shine the same way again. He tried to rebuild, of course. Apologies floated around, excuses traveled in circles, but everyone had heard his voice in that recording. Everyone had seen the facts lined up in plain sight. You cannot charm your way out of your own words. And Sarah, let us not forget about her. She had been silent most of that night, sitting just a few rows away, watching her carefully built world unravel. In the days after, she reached out. Her message was shaky, full of regret, anger, confusion, and fear all tangled together. "I did not know," she said. But the truth is, part of her did. People always know a little more than they admit to themselves. It was not easy to read her words, because as angry as I was at him, I was also hurt by her silence. That silence had cost me time, dignity, and trust. The community, though, that is where the real change showed. Suddenly, people were bolder. They spoke up at gatherings instead of swallowing discomfort. Small truths came out in kitchens, over coffee, on front porches. It was as if my act had given them permission to stop pretending everything was fine. I became, unintentionally, the one who blew the lid off. And while I did not ask for that role, I wore it because it meant something. It meant maybe someone else would not sit in the dark feeling powerless. Now, do not get me wrong, it was not all heroic aftermath. There were lonely nights, too. Nights where I wondered if exposing him had cost me friends who valued peace over truth. Nights where I missed the old world, even though it was cracked and false, simply because it was familiar. But each time that doubt crept in, I remembered his voice on that recording, the casual betrayal wrapped in charm, and I knew I had done the only thing I could live with. The aftermath taught me something important. Revenge is never clean. It does not sweep up the mess and make the world shiny. It leaves scars, both on them and on you. But sometimes scars are better than open wounds. Sometimes scars mean you finally healed enough to move on. And in the quiet of those weeks after, I realized something. I was no longer waiting for someone else to validate my pain. I had spoken it. I had shown it. And whether people clapped or frowned, I was free. That was the aftermath. Messy, complicated, but real. And real is always better than pretending. The story did not end there, of course. These kinds of stories never do. They ripple out, touching corners you never expected, shaping the way you see the world forever. Looking back, I realized the whole journey wasn't really about him at all. It was about me. About what I was willing to accept, what I was willing to stay silent about, and what I finally decided to stand up for. The biggest lesson? Silence protects the wrong people. Every time I bit my tongue, every time I told myself to let it slide, I gave him more room to keep doing what he was doing. Speaking up may have been messy, but silence would have been poison. The second lesson was this. Revenge doesn't have to mean cruelty. It doesn't have to be screaming matches, slammed doors, or ruined lives for the sake of drama. Real revenge, the kind that sticks, is simply the truth, laid out so clean and undeniable that it cuts sharper than anything you could ever yell. The truth doesn't need volume, it just needs daylight. And maybe the most surprising lesson? I learned how strong I actually am. For years, I thought I was too soft, too forgiving, too willing to let things slide. But when the moment came, when the evidence was in my hands and the lies piled too high, I didn't crumble. I didn't look away. I stood tall. And that showed me that strength isn't loud. It's steady. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Do not underestimate yourself. The quietest person in the room might be the one carrying the sharpest truth. And when the time comes to reveal it, trust me, no matter how scared you are, it's worth it. Because once you speak your truth, no one can ever use silence against you again. And that, my friends, is the story. If you made it this far, you know this wasn't just about revenge. It was about finding your voice when someone tried to take it away. If this story hit home for you, do me a favor. Tap that like button and subscribe, because I've got more real stories coming that you do not want to miss. But more importantly, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where you finally stood up and spoke your truth, even when it was messy? Share it in the comments. This community isn't just about my stories. It's about our stories. When you share, someone else out there feels less alone. Remember this. Revenge might get people curious, but truth, that's what changes lives. Hold on to yours, protect it, and never let anyone dim it. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and don't ever be afraid to let the truth speak louder than the lies.